The Toronto Maple Leafs have just completed one of their worst seasons in more than 2 decades, spending much of the past year as a bottom feeder in the NHL. So what's the key to resurrecting one of hockey's most iconic franchises? I spent the afternoon with Paul Bruno, a senior hockey writer for RotoWire.com, to get the lowdown on what the Leafs rebuild will entail. So, Paul, first of all, good afternoon and welcome to the Two-Man Advantage podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Dave Nonis and Peter Horachek were both fired after the Leafs completed a season where they scored 68 points, which was the fewest in an NHL regular season since 1996 and 97. So can you tell me what you think went wrong for Dave Nonis, whether you think Peter Horachek got the short end of the stick, and what's next for the Leafs in your opinion?
That's a big question. I'll try and be concise with my answer. First of all, this team was in a playoff spot when they made that coaching change. If you'll recall, under Randy Carlyle, they had a winning record. But the decision was made by the people on high, like Brendan Shanahan, because this team was headed for the usual 7th to 10th place finish in the Eastern Conference. He didn't want that. This is an endless cycle that the Leafs have been in for the last 20 years. And he said, in order to get better, the plan was that they had to strip this thing down, because he doesn't want to finish in that 7 to 10 spot anymore. And they brought in Peter Horachek to be, well, he was already on the coaching staff, but they brought him in to be the head guy just to see the thing through to the end of the season while they decided how they were going to dismantle things. There's no doubt in my mind that they wanted to get worse before they can get better. And the plan that I see going forward lines up that way in that they're going to draft in the top 5 this year, probably not going to have a good team for a couple of years, and finish near the bottom of the standings, accumulate more draft picks by changing the roster over, getting rid of the likes of Kessel and Phaneuf to get more young pieces, more draft pieces to dominate at the draft table. That's the key to the change in what the Leaf fortunes should be in the next few years.
So in the summer of 2009, then GM Brian Burke had a big summer. He signed Colton Orr. He gave 2 first-round picks to Boston to Phil Kessel, and then he also signed Dion Phaneuf a couple of months later. So when you look at those core 4 players and Tyler Bozak as well, when you look at those core 4 players, do you think the summer of 2009 had something that has a large part to play on where the Leafs are now? Or
I sure do, Kevin, but it's just the latest chapter in what's been an endless cycle of tinkering around the roster, trying to buy your way back into a contending team. This team has never really bottomed out, to my last point. They never reached the depths of the draft where they get the top 3 pick or the top 5 pick on a consistent basis. They've tried to buy their way into changing the roster around and getting a quick fix going. That's only temporary. Even if the outcome is good 1 year, it's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model. And that's why I think that was a bad year in retrospect, looking back, spending all the money on those guys who never really accomplished anything. If you're gonna spend money on a core like they did, it better be a core like the Chicago Blackhawks that's actually won a couple of cups, don't you think?
And in terms of Toronto, they've missed the playoffs 9 out of 10 years. They've also gone through 4 general managers and 4 head coaches during that time, including a whole bunch of other goalies as well. So what do you think is the key to establishing some consistency both in the locker room and amongst the fans moving forward?
I think staying focused on the long-term objective of building piece by piece, getting younger, getting more talented, and not going out into the free agent market, spending your big bucks there? How about growing the team internally? The model is something that they have an advantage of over most other clubs, because you saw it with Mike Santorelli's, Daniel Winnick in the last couple of years. They brought those guys along for $1 million to fill out their roster. Then they turned them into multiple assets, draft picks and other prospects going forward. If you're going to go into the free agent market, that's the way I see you going forward and getting those types of pieces in order to get more assets. Don't blow your brains out getting a 32-year-old winger whose the best days are behind him, but rather the younger guys who make sense to fit into this roster, if only for a trial basis, so that other teams look at them and then pay you when their contract runs out here to get a hold of them before the end of the year is out.
And in your view, what will the Leafs be looking for in their next head coach, and what role does current Red Wings head coach Mike Babcock play into Brandon Shanahan and the Leafs thinking?
Well, of course, they have a relationship. They know each other from the time spent in Detroit. So if Mike Babcock is interested in being part of a 3 to 5 year plan, he'll be here. That's the short answer. I don't think that's in the cards, though, because this is a guy who wants to be known as the best coach in the NHL on a long-term basis. If he comes here, he's not going to be in the playoffs for a couple of years, and he's going to be forgotten for a while until the Leafs return to their former glory. So I think he's looking for a team that's maybe switching gears. You'll see a lot of coaching changes. You've already seen a couple with San Jose. Well, the new head coach better be a guy who works well with young kids and is aware that this is going to be a rebuild, and be patient with them and have a good track record in that regard. So I'm looking maybe between Kyle Dubas and Mark Hunter, I think they must know everybody that's in hockey in the junior ranks. Maybe they'll pick somebody from that level. Maybe they'll be looking around at the NHL at an assistant who is looking to make the grade as a head coach. But whoever it is has to realize that they're in this for a 3 to 5 year period where the results may be minimal. So it's important that they're all in sync. It's not good. It's like the gears in a car. If they're not working together, this isn't going to go well. So they know what they need, and the coach who comes here has to realize that he's got to be a fit into this model that is a long-term look. This is not a quick fix situation. Well, I think that the Babcock scenario is one that may happen if he gets a dual portfolio, Kevin, and that means, does he become the president at coach, or vice president at coach, or a GM and a coach? Does he get an additional title in addition to the coaching ranks? That's, I think, the combination of titles that he'll require. He'll need to be involved. He'll want to be involved in every roster decision, like a general manager would consult his peers. Typically, the general manager and coach have distinct responsibilities, as you know, but Babcock would come here, I think, if he had a say in the roster's makeup.
And tell me, could you give me an idea of the major or minor changes that may be coming to this roster? I know that you said that part of the core four may be gone as well. So could you give me an idea of some major and minor changes that may be coming to the roster, and how active do you think the Leafs will be this summer?
Well, they should be quite active in terms of getting rid of some of the contracts that they're carrying at the top end of their salary cap structure. Number one on the list has to be Dion Phaneuf. I think the poor guy was miscast as the captain here. As a young man, he was brought in by Brian Burke, as you recall, to be the captain, new face of this team. I don't think he was adequately prepared to deal with what the situation was that he was coming into. And that's a big contract that he carries. They got to get it off the books. Number two, listen, I was a Phil Kessel fan as long as he's been a Maple Leaf. But the way he carried himself in the second half of the season, he quit on this team. And I don't like quitters, and I don't think that Brendan Shanahan does either. So I think he's gone too. And I think they're going to just go to the highest bidder. And it may not look like a good hockey deal, Kevin, on the surface for either of these guys, but they've got to get those guys, and there's combined $15 million cap hit out of here so that they can really get on with the rebuild. Then beyond that, you're looking at Joffrey Lupul. Will anybody take that 5+ year contract? Tyler Bozak's an interesting case. He's got a I think a cap-friendly 4.25 hit. And that's something they might not want to get rid of. He's a serviceable forward. What you might see next year is he gets the second line role and Nazem Kadri gets the first line to see what we have there. I think it's imperative for this club to find out what they have in some of their younger guys with whom there's question marks for me. I put Nazem Kadri in that camp. I put Jake Gardner in that camp. Give these guys lots of ice time, lots of responsibility, and let's see what we really have in those two players if we give them frontline minutes.
And I know that you said that Kessel quit on the team. So can you tell me, do you think a lack of mental toughness contributed to their demise down the stretch?
I think that was a big part of it. I also thought that they weren't engaged in the physical side of the game. I believe, Kevin, and I don't know what your thought is on this, but I really believe that a team, in order to be successful in the NHL, needs to have a physical component. That doesn't mean fighters necessarily, but go in and finish your checks and don't be afraid to mix it up in the corners. They have too many pretty boys on this roster right now, to be quite frank and quite blunt, that don't mix it up physically in the corners of the rink and win enough puck battles. They've got to make that a central part of their development going forward. They have to be willing to battle for loose pucks. This team this year was certainly not. So let's bring in players that are.
And since January 6th, the Leafs finished with a record of 9-28-5 in the NHL, and they also have a 9.5% chance of winning the Connor McDavid sweepstakes. How realistic do you think that is, and which direction would you like to see the Leafs go in the draft?
Well, I know that they lost the opportunity on Connor McDavid last weekend. I don't know if you caught that, Kevin, but they will get the 4th pick overall. Edmonton got the Connor McDavid #1 overall draft pick. Last weekend that was decided. So the Leafs are going to have to go about this thing smartly and pick players that fit into their plan. I don't know that they necessarily go for the biggest guy or the most skilled, but they got to go for the guy that fits into their structure, whatever that may be deemed to be. Right now, I can tell you they have a bunch of guys on the Marlies who look like interesting prospects. You got Connor Brown, you got William Nylander, and players like that I think have a future in the NHL. They're not the biggest guys in the world, but look at some of the other guys around the league. Are you telling me there's no room for a guy like a Johnny Hockey in Toronto? Johnny Gaudreau in Calgary is doing very well right now. He's not the biggest guy in the world either. So size doesn't have to be the dominant characteristic, but overall character may be a big factor in light of the fact of what I just said. They lack in the character department, and I think that needs to be a big part of the makeup of this team and its players going forward.
And finally, Paul, tell me, finish this sentence for me. If the Leafs are going to have a successful offseason, where does that start, and how would you define that for Toronto?
It starts at the NHL draft. And at the NHL draft, I'm not talking about just the first or second round. They have to hit some home runs in the latter part of the draft. I always cite, when I'm asked a question like this, look at the Detroit model. They bring in European scouts and they find these gems, the Pavel Datsyuks, the Henrik Zetterbergs in the 8th, 9th rounds. They have a guy on their roster who was the last pick of an NHL draft recently, and Jonathan Ericsson. He's still on their team. He's still playing a regular shift. The Leafs have to hit some homers late in the draft. They have 18 picks in the next 14 rounds over the next 2 amateur drafts, and that's even before they acquire any more in trades this offseason. So they got to hit the home runs at the draft table. That's when I'll be happy.
Well, Paul, we thank you for your time this afternoon and for joining us on the Two Man Advantage podcast.
Kevin, it was my pleasure. Obviously, you're a Leaf fan like I am, and it's always great to share thoughts on that club.